So yeah, for me, it was when I was about 16, I got interested in this. And it was literally a day like today, it was a Sunday, a little bit rainy, not a lot, a bit, lost for something to do. And so I picked up some of my dad's old books, and one in particular was called The Welsh Triangle by Peter Paget. And it's a little bit controversial, I think, now, actually, because I think he's been proven to be a little bit deceptive, maybe. But anyway, at the time, the book blew me away. I mean, I was getting shivers down my spine and all sorts. And I read it, and I've never looked back since then. So I went and read all of his books that he had at the time. He didn't have so many, but I read them all. This one, Interrupted Journey, Barney and Betty Hill, okay, it's a classic one. And he had Von Daniken books and all that lot as well. But for me, I just needed to know, and a little bit naively, I think, I thought, right, I'm going to get answers to this, I'm going to find the proof here. So I started reading, and I used to follow the references, go to the library, order books from the library. 50 pence it was at the time. So we'd order the books and then go and get them, and also go to second-hand shops as well, and just pick up whatever I could. And it didn't take long before I realised that there was something really interesting going on. As they say, a lot of sightings are explainable, 90 to 90% whatever, but it's the 10% that aren't that I think we're all interested in. I should say that it's thanks to my dad, really, that I got interested in this subject. And the reason for that is because he did have a personal interest, but he had personal experiences. So he used to live in Hunnaby when I think he was probably from about 5 till about 11 or something like that. He lived there. Obviously, I was reading his books and things, but then talking to him about it, that's when he sort of explained to me that he'd had personal experiences when he was living in Hunnaby in his early years, from about 9 till, about 5 till 11 or something like that. But he used to have these beings, essentially, it's almost like a classic abduction scenario. He used to have these beings come into his room at night. He was paralysed, he couldn't move. When it subsided, he'd go and tell his parents, and they just sort of fobbed him off that it was, a dream or whatever. But he always knew there was a lot more. And what was interesting is he remembered them, or he thought of them as being like giant slugs, weirdly enough, of all things. But I think maybe the age he was at and the things he was doing at the time, playing in the fields and stuff like that, how he was associating it, But these were huge, they were big. And I think later on he sort of described them or thought of them more as a hooded being, and like the classic grey types, actually. So they were that, and his dad was quite hostile to it, and they didn't get on very well. But talking to his mum, I think she's in the picture there behind you, she'd had experiences as well. She'd had one time, I think when she was young, she had what she described as a giant flower descend from the sky, and a fairy or a little being come out and talk to her. And it wasn't any more than that, but it's very intriguing. And on another incident, they had what they thought was ball lightning come. I think it came down the chimney into the room, flew around the room a bit, and went out the window. So very suggestive and interesting types of stuff. That were going on. And then throughout the years, obviously my dad, he moved to EAB and he met my mum. And my mum, when they first moved to Barnoldswick, she had a sighting. It was 1969. It was the first time she'd seen anything, funnily enough, was when she met my dad. And they used to have an outside toilet. And so she'd gone out there to go to the toilet. And she looked up and she'd seen, I think it was something like 7 or 8 cylinder type objects of sort of a bluey green colour. I don't think they were hovering or changing direction, but again, it's not something that's got an easy explanation. It's not easily resolved as something conventional. So I thought that was interesting. There was another incident probably when I was about 4, 5 maybe, which would make it 79, 80, something like that. I can't remember it, but my dad used to talk about it quite a lot. And we were in here, and he'd looked out the window and he'd seen what he described as like a massive saucer, orange glowing saucer or disc thing. But he said it had like a little bit of a tail or something that he thought he could see. It'd gone across, and then 5 or 10 minutes later, another one. And apparently we were all watching this. I can't remember it, to be honest. And he always remembered it as being a bit like the Starship Enterprise, because he was quite into Star Trek, and he was that tail aspect of it, so that was interesting. And then for me, it would have been, I think it would have been about 1983. I had a kind of a sighting. And the situation was, we used to just play out in the field as kids, you know, as you did at that time. And there was a family, 3 kids up the street, so we used to play with them quite a lot, Michael, Matthew and Lorraine. And we were toy fighting. So the idea is, you know, you're not hitting or anything, you just try and pin the person down and restrain them, if you will. And Michael, I was fighting with Michael, he was a little bit older than me, 2 years maybe, something like that. So maybe he was 10. I was about 8, I think. And I was in a position where I was kind of winning, you know, and I'm thinking, and I was just getting his arms pinned down, if you will, and he just stopped resisting. I just thought, and he was looking over my shoulder, and he said something like, "What was that?" You know, I think he probably swore at the time, and I think I can't really remember seeing anything, to be honest with you, but I think I might have looked round, just saw a bit of a flash or something, and then, you know, talking to them, what happened, and what he said was, as we were fighting and I was pinning him down, he looked, and this object came along, it looked like a bright star, slowly stopped to his eye and hovered there for a few seconds, which is when he was like, what's that? And at the point just before I turned, I think, to look at it, it shot off. So from a standstill, sort of like an instantaneous acceleration, if you will. So, I mean, again, that's a classic UFO observation, you know, UAP observables, as they call them now. And it's something that conventional aircraft can't do. This was silent. All of these reports were silent, by the way. None of them had any sound associated with them, which again is a key characteristic. And something that is quite important, isn't it? Everything we have, apart from the new drones nowadays, they make a racket, don't they? Jet engines and helicopters, and they all make a racket. So, I mean, I guess maybe all of this sort of came together so that when I was 16 and I picked up this book, it became an obsession, really, but a healthy obsession, as in I have other interests, I have family life and a business and all that, you know. But it's something I think about probably every day, and I'm reading, researching every day and speaking to people about it. Maybe speaking to a few locals that had seen things as well, you know, family members. And then I eventually came across the UFO magazine and all that were just coming out, and I started reading about the abduction phenomenon as well, and that really caught my interest. So I read all the Bud Hopkins books, and John Mack was just coming out at that time, Whitley Strieber and all that, you know, people, I'm sure everyone's familiar with this one.
Yeah.
Communion cover, you know, and it's well known that a lot of people have just seen that image and it's triggered memories and things. So what really happened next, which was just incredible to me really, is that I was doing all this research, and then I heard, and this would have been 94, late 94, 95, so I've been into this about 3 years, something like that. And my mum and dad told me about a local builder, Mel Ford, who had been seeing UFOs apparently, so I thought, well, I've got to go and speak to this guy. So they made arrangements, and I mean, he literally lives just 5 minutes up the hill from here, 5-minute walk. So I went round and we started speaking to him about it. And I mean, I went multiple times over about 3 years, and I was taking notes and records, and I put together this, which is my report on it, you know, which I'm so glad I did, because if I didn't have all this written down, I'd be trying to remember it, you know what I mean? Mel's passed away now, a few years ago, so his wife's still alive, Helen. So it started on the 24th of December 94, and the whole family were up there. So it's Melvin and his wife Helen, and he has two sons, John and Andrew. So I think at that time they were probably about 18, 19, something like that. They both had girlfriends. So there were 6 people up at the house having a Sunday lunch, if you will. Obviously it'd have been dark. I don't know if I have the time actually, but it was later in the evening, and they noticed orange lights. Now these are the classic sort of, used to call them amber gamblers, didn't they? Or, you know, but it's what Paul Sinclair's seen on the East Coast, and it's these orange spheres. And there were 2 or 3 of them. Up where they live is on Ben Lane. It's on the outskirts of town really, and just next to it is Rolls-Royce sports field, because we have 2 Rolls-Royce plants in Barnoldswick, which may be relevant or may not, I don't know. They're not doing sensitive work, but they do make, aerospace stuff. So they're watching these orange spheres manoeuvring around, disappearing and reappearing in different parts of the sky, and they all just came to watch because they were just like, what the hell's this? And they took pictures, which didn't come out, unfortunately. I've seen the pictures, but it's just blurry. So at some point, all these disappeared, and what they said is that it was replaced by 2 greeny white lights, with the left one slightly higher than the right, and it did this kind of movement. They sort of lined up and did this kind of movement. I think it just vanished. The whole thing lasted about 15 minutes. It upset the dog. And it was about half an hour actually. And what happened at that just kicked off what Mel later described to me in an interview as 6 months of hell, is how he described it, because there was a lot of fear involved with all this as well, So that was the first thing. And I mean, usually people see something and that's all you do get, but in this instance it was almost like a haunting or something like that, because the phenomenon, whatever it is, seemed to focus on them after that. And what happened next was Mel's oldest son, John, I've got, maybe this was March, this was 2 or 3 months later, but I think it had been happening a few times. He kept waking up with light sleep paralysis, if you will, so he was waking up paralysed. But there was bright lights in the room. I think at first he didn't really dare open his eyes, but it was like someone was shining a torch in his face and he couldn't move. And he was telling his dad about this and his mum, and they didn't really believe him, to be honest. It's that familiar thing. They just thought it's just a nightmare, or I think his grandma had died recently, and they said, oh well, maybe it's your mum or something like that, your grandma. And he said, I don't think it's grandma, because there's shining torches in my eyes, And then on the second or third time this happened, he did the classic thing. He went and told his mum and dad, and I mean, he's not a little kid at this age. He's sort of 19, 20, 18, 19. Like, what's just happened? And they went in, and they said he had 2 pillows, and these pillows were drenched through with sweat, essentially. So it suggests that whatever happened, it happened in the room, and he was there, terrified, for quite a bit of time to produce so much liquid, you know what I mean? Anyway, Mel, they were intrigued, but they were just didn't know what to make of it, essentially. So what happened after that was it happened to Mel, and he woke up, I think this was in March or April. He woke up much the same. Now in the bedroom there's a street light on the lane, and it gives some ambient light for the whole, like we all have a bit of ambient light in the bedroom at night if you wake up. On this occasion he woke up and he said it was absolutely pitch black. He'd never known anything like it. And he couldn't move, he was paralysed, and there were 2, what he described as eyes, about 5 or 10 pence piece size, about this far apart, reddy orange. And he said the bed was quite high, and these were just maybe about 4 foot off the ground. It was really interesting. He couldn't move, couldn't do anything, but he managed to sort of say, Helen, to his wife, sort of, and nudge her a little bit, and at one point she did wake up, responded, and she turned the light on. Nothing there, nothing to be seen. But they had a clock in the room, which was a teas maid, you used to get the teas maids that make you a cup of tea for the morning. So they had one of those, and it stopped at 3 a.m, which again is a kind of a classic time for this sort of stuff. And it never worked again, So after this, Mel's sort of having a bit of a change of heart about what's happening to his son here. The interesting thing is that none of them had any interest in the subject really, or any knowledge of it, at all. So as we move through it and you see the things that happened, it's just incredible really. But one incident that happened, I think this was in April, to Mel, same thing again. It was like a paralysis. He woke up, he was paralysed, couldn't move. I think he said he felt like he had a spring, something pressing into his back. like a bed, and a thought in his mind was, oh, it's just a bed spring, don't worry about it, kind of thing. And when he woke up, he actually found a little lump of a thing in his bed, and he still got, well, he still had it, and I do have pictures of that. If you want, I'll send you the pictures. You can edit them in. That was one, like an implant scenario. So if you're familiar with Daryl Sims' work, yeah. And another time he had something very similar where it was in his head, and he picked at this thing in his head the next day, and he managed to pull it out, and he passed it on to one of the local researchers, a guy called Simon Whitehead, who was working with Tony Dodd at the time. And Tony Dodd got hold of this, and I know that Tony Dodd sent this off for analysis, and I believe it got lost. I don't think he ever got it back. Mel certainly didn't ever get it back. But the story from Tony Dodd was that the lab results came back and said, oh, it's just a piece of wood or something like that, which Mel was a bit sceptical of. But I mean, it could have been. It could have not been related to all of this. The interesting aside is that Simon, the local researcher, he said when he had it, he tried to look at it under a microscope, and he put the fluid on to stick it to a slide. Yeah. And when he did, he said it split in half, and it looked like it had cells inside. Now, I've been in touch with the guy, and I've asked him for more information. He didn't really have any for me, so I don't really know what he means. I'm thinking like a pomegranate or something like that. Don't know. But it sounds unusual, doesn't it, for for a splinter. Anyway, let's say. So there were those, and it's all fitting into this abduction scenario, isn't it, where you're getting missing time and, paralysis at night and potential implants and things. And maybe they had loads of sightings. There was military flights, which may or may not be relevant, but they were, flying over. There were helicopters hovering nearby and all that lot. And I think probably one of the most significant things to come up next was in September of '95, and Mel told me this one. He'd got up Saturday morning, and he was sat in his chair in the living room, not particularly watching telly or anything, just maybe reading the paper, relaxing. His wife was in the kitchen, and I think his eldest son John was in the bedroom, and I think Andrew had moved out by that time, so there's just three of them in the house. And he said as he was sat there, no paralysis or anything as far as I know, he didn't mention any. He noticed something strange in the room, and he said it was blue light, essentially. As he looked at the wall, he could see a line, a horizontal line, all the way around the room, and below it was sort of bluey. It was a bluey colour, and as he watched, it rose up this line, almost like you fill the room with water. Yeah. And he said it filled right up to the top over the course of about 10 seconds or something like that, right up to the top, and then slowly, and his phrase was, it emptied out, which is, just really strange. And then what really makes this interesting is that at that point, Helen, his wife, came in and said, have you just seen the lightning? And he'd already told me it was a beautiful day, it was blue sky. He said, lightning? What do you mean it's blue sky out there? She said, I've just seen blue beams of light coming through the kitchen window. Which is, again, and then John had come out of the bedroom and said, what's going on? My room's just flashed with blue. But for him, it was a bright flash of light like that. So, again, to me, it's suggestive of abduction activity and missing time, in that Mel experienced something that sort of lasted a few, let's say 10, 20 seconds. Helen experienced something that lasted, maybe a couple of seconds, just a flash, and John, a real quick, instant thing, But they all experienced something involving blue light at the same time, which to me is fascinating. It's and as you know, blue light has been associated with this phenomenon for a long time, for many years. Now the other thing was, when Mel told me about this, he didn't know anything about the subject, which we're going to talk about a little bit, which is mutilations. So for anybody that doesn't know, there is a phenomenon of animal mutilations associated with the UFO sightings, which dates back to at least the 1960s. So in the midst of all this, Helen comes down one morning, she opens the back door, and she finds 2 dead mice. It's not unusual, cats kill mice, but there's 2, and they're both led next to each other, side by side, both heads in the same direction, tails, and almost as if they've been placed there is how she thought it. When Mel came home, she told him, he thought nothing of it. As he said, I just put them on a shovel and slung them over the fence, like you do. Well, the next day, she came down and it was the same again. Another 2, exactly the same. So it's starting to seem a little bit strange. Well, at this point, as I said, Tony Dodd was involved and he was investigating the case. And he was also investigating the case of Jason Andrews. Are you familiar with that one? Anne Andrews and Jason Andrews. There's a book called Abducted. Right, I've not brought it, but I've got it upstairs. Just very briefly, it was a young lad. He was experiencing abduction phenomena. Bright lights. They had a small holding. The horses were turning up with injuries. They were seeing UFOs, and on one occasion they found 4 dead mice. And this was, I think it was the same year. I'm pretty sure it was. I'd have to check. The mice. I've got it down here. November 95, so I'll have to check, but I think it was, or very, very much so. And they found 4 dead mice laid out in a line, all facing the same direction, and what they said is that each one had a hole in its head. So Tony Dodd was finding this, he was finding foxes and badgers and all sorts with the hole in the head, and the rectum cord out, which is, it's not nice, but it's a classic sort of mutilation scenario. So, we can't say for sure, but the implication is that whatever this phenomenon is that's mutilating animals is also doing it to wild animals and even potentially animals as small as mice, which I think is just incredible. And for anyone that's interested, if you look in Tony Dodd's book, Alien Investigator, or Anne Andrews' book, which is called Abducted, the photograph is in there. I mean, I can send you that as well if you like. Yeah. It's not very clear, it's blurry. But the photograph of the 4 dead mice in there, and Tony Dodd mentions the fact of coming here to Barnolds in his book, just very briefly though. Yeah. So yeah, there was that. That was an interesting one. Now, another thing which I don't think I've actually discussed before is that because this was happening to Mel and it was happening, maybe it happened 4 or 5 times over this 6 months. This paralysis experience. And in fact, he had one incident where, again, he woke up in the middle of the night. It was pitch black in the room, blacker than it should be, no ambient light. And he was paralysed. And he said he was struggling and he managed to get out of this paralysis. And when he did, he said the blackness receded out of the room. And I thought that was really strange. He said he was freaked out and he had a cigarette, settled down. Turned the light off, settled down to sleep. It happened again. He was paralysed, the room went black. He managed to fight it off, it receded. So it happened 3 times this. Almost like he's trying to be attacked and he's fighting something off. Honestly, I do wonder with these cases if people's memories are being affected. As we know with abductions, when they use hypnotic regression, people often recount these abduction scenarios, which are very consistent. The problem with hypnosis is, it's a little bit iffy. You can't rely on it 100%, but it is quite compelling, the testimony that you get under hypnosis. So this thing, he fought it off 3 times, if you will, whatever it was, and then he said he literally sat up the whole night and smoked a full packet of 20 cigarettes because he was so freaked out. And these are the reasons why he was saying it was 6 months of hell. Because I think a lot of it happened in the first 6 months, and it was probably only 6 months in when I first started speaking to him, And just to be clear, I went up there over the course of about 3 years, 10 times maybe, and we used to spend hours. Like we'd turn up about 8, we'd be there till 1 o'clock, something like that, so 5 hours. And he'd go. Mel was compelled to tell anyone who'd listen about this. He's just the way it affected him. As a local builder, if anyone would want to listen, he'd tell them, and go on about it. So to talk to him about it, he used to jump about all over the place, telling all these different stories, but he was 100% consistent. He never tripped himself up. It was always the same, identical story. He had his wife sat next to him who had plenty to add because she experienced a lot of it, and same with his sons as well. You know, he used to work with his son as a local builder. Yeah, so in amongst all of this, he managed to capture 3. He bought a video camera specifically, and he managed to capture 3 sets of footage. One of them, I think they'd been out for the day, and they saw a light in the sky. They went up to Lake District, I think. And when they came back, they felt it had followed them back, literally. So they filmed it. And it's just a little bit of film. Now, it's a bit ambiguous, and that's the problem with a lot of UFO clips. It doesn't mean that what the person saw wasn't anomalous, but it's hard to prove that just from the video, you know, a point of light against the dark sky or whatever. So there was another one which was very minimal, if you will, but the third one is interesting. It's an interesting story, and the reason was, again, he spotted a light Mel out of his window, and where he looks over the Rolls-Royce playing fields and things like that, there's a farmer's field and a hill beyond that. There's Greghill churches, and there's an aerial mast on top of this hill, transmitter tower. And he spotted something. He said it was really bright light coming from his right to his left. And this is a report I've heard a lot, and you'll see it a lot yourself. He said it looked like he was searching for something. So you've got something that's moving around. It's, you know, almost like a search pattern, and it's really commonly reported that. So he started filming, and to his eye, this thing, like a bright yellowy white light, landed on the hill nearby, and then it dimmed down, like the glow reduced in brightness. And he's got that. He has got that on video. At that point, his son John went driving down the road to try and have a closer look, but he actually went the main road, so it was the wrong side of the hill, if you will, and he couldn't see anything. And Mel was sort of, you could hear him on the video saying, "Oh, you should have told Simon to come and have a look," you know. And when I'm watching this, I'm like, "Why didn't you phone me? I'd have been straight down there." Anyway, so he's got that, and that's, I'll send it to you if you like. It's interesting. Yeah. You can hear Mel talking on it and stuff. Yeah. And in fact, I have a video of him describing the sighting during the day, and then I've got footage looking through his window during the day, so you can measure up a bit what you're looking at. You can see that it's on a hill. You can see there shouldn't be any lights out there as well, so because no roads up there. So yeah, that was another interesting one, and it ties into this. And this really, again, it underlines how powerful these experiences were for Mel, is that he started setting the video camera up in his bedroom, filming himself at night to see if he could capture something. And he never particularly did, except for this one time where he told me this. And what he was doing was setting his video, watching it through on the camera to see if anything happened, nothing, recording over it the following night. So this one night, he'd got, I think it was about 3 o'clock in the morning. He had video of him laying in bed, asleep. And then he said, then it just went funny. And he said, and it looked not like, you know, the fuzz that you get when there's no channel, but he said it looked like bubbles all over the screen. And I'm like, you know what? Have you still got it? No, I didn't think much of it, so I recorded over it next day. I'm like, oh no. And the worst thing is he looked at it through his camera, so it was black and white. And so he never, you know, if you'd put it on a screen, there may have been some colour or something like that. So unfortunately, we never got to see that. But, and it's suggestive, it's very interesting. So, I mean, as you said yourself earlier, that there was kind of poltergeist phenomena associated with this as well. There was lights in the sky, there was these kinds of things happening in the house. But then Helen had said when she was on her own during the day, quite a bit, she'd sometimes hear someone say her name. You know what I mean? It's not a big house, similar size to this. There's nobody there, you know. The letterbox banging, like the postman's just posted someone through it, but when she went, there's nothing there. And as Mel said to me, to quote him directly, it's got hellish bloody springs on it, that letterbox, you know. So it's not the wind is what he's saying, just blowing it. And then quite a significant one was they had this ornamental mask just on a shelf next to the TV. And I think it started with they came down in the morning. It was on the floor, so it was falling off. So you don't think too much of it. I think it happened about 4 times. They kept coming down. It was out of place. And then on one particular occasion, Mel and Helen were sat watching the TV, and it just jumped off. And then he said, it came about 3 feet away from the shelf. A shelf that's only about a foot high, 2 foot off the ground maybe. So again, very strange, very unusual. I think he told me he was cooking food one day. He took his pan, he put his pan lid on the side. And I mean, we've all seen this where you get a bit of steam build up under your pan, and it might glide a little bit on the steam or something like that if it's on a glass surface. This thing lifted up, he said, about 3 or 4 inches, and then just flopped down. So you've got all this going on around this time. And then one occasion, they used to, like most couples, especially at that time and of that generation really, they used to go out of a weekend, and they'd go out, Mel went out on a Friday, and then on a Saturday, Mel and Helen went out together. That's the way they did it. And on one particular Saturday night, they came home, and there's a main road essentially running through Barnoldswick here, and they live on Ben Lane, which is just off the main road. So they come down this way, and as they turn onto Ben Lane, he said they saw these greenish looking discs, 2 of them I think, hovering, big things hovering in the sky. And Mel turns to his wife Helen and says, "Bloody hell, they're waiting for us as we come home now." Which I mean, it's probably exactly how it felt, that what was going on was just almost seemed to be getting more and more intense. They watched these for a while. And I think this may have been the same night actually. After they went to bed, they'd gone to bed, Helen was in bed, and Mel was just curious. He had his interest up, so he was looking out the window, and he had the curtains behind him, and he was looking at this hill where the UFO had landed previously. And he said he saw what looked to him like fingers of light, about 10 of them, coming up from behind the hill. Circumferences. By fingers, to me, what I take from that is that they were rounded tips, and they were extending up from beyond the hill like that. And he shouted, "Helen, Helen!" And he's, again, to quote him, because I like doing that, he said, "No sooner did she get her knees out of bed to come and have a look, they were attracted down these lights." And just to go back to the blue light experience that he had, this is something that's quite common in the field when people report these lights, is that they seem to be contained. It's not like a torchlight, it's more like a plasma, like a glowing gas or something is actually contained to allow it to fill a room up or emerge and retract like that. So these are little subtle details that I know nobody in that family knew about, which are throughout the UFO literature. If you look, you're going to see this kind of stuff, which is a bit beyond our science, it's a bit beyond our understanding, and it's a nice little cue to me that tells you that these are honest witnesses, And I mean, I think most of this kind of culminated, it would have been, what's the date? At the end of the first year, 3rd of December, 95. And it was a Friday night, so Mel had been out, I'd been out on his own. He'd had a few, and I mean, people can argue, well, he was drunk, so, he must have. But whoever hallucinates off being drunk, let's face it. So,
not many.
No. So, he's walking home, same way. He says he prefers that way because it's a bit darker the other way, walking down the lane at night. So, he's walking that way, and when you get to the top of this hill here, there's a canal. You cross the canal on the bridge, and then there's a bus stop on your right. And beyond that is the junction to Ben Lane, which is where Mel lives. And as he got to this bus stop, he stopped because he saw a little being, essentially. And it was stood, very specifically, he said it was stood on the grass. It wasn't on the road, it was on the grass. And what he said first of all was, I mean, he was quite tall, was Mel, not giant, but 6 foot, something like that. And he said he just had the impression that a woman walked past him, but she was taller than he was. This is about 12 o'clock at night, half 12 at night, something like that. There is Rose Social Club there, so there could have been somebody walking past. But to be taller than him. Anyway, he didn't think anything of that. And then he spotted this being. And the way he described it was, as I said, it was on the grass, it wasn't on the road. It was about 4 foot tall. It was wearing a robe, a hooded robe. It had its hands together like that. And its hands were hidden in its sleeves, if you will. It had its hands in its sleeves. And he had the impression that he thought it was carrying something, so almost as if it was a bit bulked out there at the front. And the robe covered its feet, couldn't see any feet. He had a pointed chin, pale face, and big black eyes. He said, and he just sort of stopped looking at this thing and he's thinking, do I run? Do I run away or what? And he said to me, you can't, it's not like a human face, you can't get any emotional interpretation off a face like that. And he sort of cocked its head at him and then it continued, and he said it went round the corner before he did. So it sort of continued and went into the darkness of the lane. He can't particularly remember anything else after that. Can't remember getting home. But when he was telling me this story, Helen did say to him, she said, well, you were late that night. Friday night out, he's probably on about pub shuts, he's on about 12:30. This was more like 1 or 1:30. So there's a suggestion of missing time, but nothing we can say for sure there, But again, classic grey type entity, And what really was interesting to me is that I noticed, because I used to drive this way all the time, there was a circle of earth about 2 foot on that grass that was dead for a couple of years. I mean, nowadays I'd have had taken the samples and the pictures and all that, but I was a lot younger and a lot more greener in those days, so I didn't. But I'll never forget that was there, And I mean, that was probably one of the most dramatic experiences I think that they experienced during all that.
It's a classic though, isn't it? Everything you're saying there, it just, when you're going through it, there's things that I'm thinking of.
Yeah, like similar to a case that you've heard before.
Yeah.
And the beauty of it being that they didn't know, they weren't interested in it, and they didn't know anything. They didn't have books. They weren't reading about it. So yeah, really compelling. And to me, just the fact that I was just getting so interested in this subject, and then all this is happening just up there. I mean, literally just up there. Now, I've had sleep paralysis, but I've never seen anything, and I would just say it's sleep paralysis because I've never had anything more than that. But I've had it quite a few times in my life. Now, I'll tell you a little story now that I haven't told anyone before, and it's not a personal, it's someone else's story, but it's just because it's never come up. It's not been hiding it, but you find this interesting. So during when all this was going on, I used to go to a friend of mine's, Heather, she was called, me and my girlfriend at the time. We used to go look after the kids, and we'd sort of stay the night in the attic. And when they come on, we'd have a chat to them. And because this was my thing at the time, I was telling her everything that was going on about Mel. And she was fascinated. This went on for weeks and weeks. And anyway, one time we went, and she said, I'll tell you about this dream I had last night. I'm like, right. She said, well, I woke up about 3 o'clock in the morning. And I went downstairs. I felt compelled to go downstairs, so she went downstairs. And she said, and there were 3 beings, little grey type beings. And she said the room stank. It was a really bad smell coming from these beings, which I'm sure you've heard before. She didn't say sulphur though. She said it was acrid like a fox.
Right.
And she's quite into nature. She was a farm girl, so she knew, she's familiar with foxes and all that. So she'd woke up, she'd come downstairs, there's these 3 beings there. Now get this, right? They said to her, tell Lee that he'll never get to know what this is about because he's not meant to know. This is what happened in her dream. And then they disappeared or whatever. She said, because it was such a smell, she went round and opened all the windows downstairs. And then she went off up to bed. Next day, when she got up, all the windows were open downstairs. So,
Yeah.
I've messaged her recently, literally just earlier this year, I think, just to check that she remembers it and things, and would she do me a drawing and would she give me more information and that. And she were it's a dream from years ago, you know what I mean? But she did confirm it happened, she remembered it. And to me, I don't really know how to take it, because these experiences are common, aren't they? Where people, the experience that they feel is like a dream, but then there's some, like Paul, there's scars.
Yeah.
That suggest it's real.
To think it's a dream, but coming downstairs in the morning and finding windows open.
Exactly.
It's a bit more than a dream.
Yeah. You could stretch to say she was sleepwalking, but she never had before or since. You know what I mean? Anyway, the implications are profound, aren't they? If you really think about that, if we just say it wasn't a dream for a minute, and I'm on the fence with this, I'm not claiming either way, but if it wasn't a dream, the implications are that these little beings were watching Mel, they had him under surveillance, and they were watching people like me go there, and visit and talk about what was happening to him, and so far as to watching me go to someone else's house and tell them about it, to sort of decide to intervene, in the most ridiculous way, the most non-human way, that tell him he's never going to know, and it's like, that's just going to make me more interested, isn't it? You know what I mean?
Yeah, it would.
Come and tell me yourself. Oh, you can't, because you proved it to me. You know what I mean? It's just bizarre, absolutely bizarre. But that's what happened. Now, another friend of mine, Gav, I won't use his last name, but he won't mind me telling you this, is that he had 2 experiences as well. Now, he says it was later, a few years later. I think it was around the same time, but we don't know. But one of his experiences was, and again, I used to go every week to his house and tell him all about what I'd been learning from Mel, or what I'd been reading or whatever, for years and years. And he woke up one night, he's in bed, can't move, he's paralysed, he feels the bed squashed down, like something's kneeling on it. He manages to open his eyes and look, and he said, there's a face there looking at him. He said it wasn't like a classic grey, and he couldn't quite explain why, but he felt it was a bit more wrinkled. Maybe it had more of a nose or something like that. I've asked him to draw it, and he won't. He won't, do he? And again, he sort of put it off as a dream. We kind of both did. But, he felt the bed pressed down, which is unusual, you know what I mean? And he developed a bit of a phobia where he could never ever go to sleep in that position facing the wall anymore. He had, face the other way, do you know what I mean? Which again is a bit suggestive. And he had another one where he woke up, couldn't move. There's 2 little beings, or one it might have been, about the same height as his speaker, just sort of looking at him, And I think he said it vanished, and sort of like some of an old sci-fi film, it just kind of like vanished away like that, which made him think it was a dream, But my youngest daughter has had similar experiences here, where she's woke up paralysed and she's seen beings in the room. Just a couple, not so many, just odd one. If anyone who's researched abduction phenomena stuff knows that it is often found within family lines. So I'll tell you suggestions that my grandma had stuff like this, my dad. I can't say that because I've never seen anything. My daughter. And a lot of other people in town. So we know what happened to the Ford family. There was a local joiner who was confiding in Mel at the time, saying he was having similar things. But I never managed to get in touch with them. Another couple of families that I know about. The local investigator Simon, who was working with Tony Dodd, recently he told me that he had the same, paralysis entities experience when he was young as well. So I think there's a lot of that going on in this area, and I mean, it's not just in this area, it's all around the world, but it's focused in pockets, isn't it? And this area, including where you are. So yeah, I mean, we were just talking about the Ford family, and that was my introduction, I think, partially into how active it is around this area. Pendle is where we are, which is quite close to Burnley. Most people are going to know Burnley. Skipton, the other side. We're on the Lancashire-Yorkshire border, right on the border. And so, yeah, behind me is Carlton Moor. And Carlton Moor is a place that Philip Mantle was, when he was with the Yorkshire UFO Society, before it became Quest International and UFO magazine, Tony Dodd, Graham Birdsall, they had a caravan up there. They spent a week up there. And they were getting hundreds of reports. It was their hotspot area, really. Tony Dodd, I think, had his first encounter up there on Carlton Moor. And then the A59, which runs to Skipton from here, if you look at Gary Heseltine's work, the police cases, there's loads of police officers. I guess because they're out early hours of the morning, in the 80s and 90s, they were seeing all sorts. So I thought, right, what I'll do, I'll kind of take a leaf out of Paul Sinclair's book, and I'll just pick an area that's accessible to me, so about a 30-mile radius from where I am here, extending out to Burnley, to Ilkley, Clitheroe, and then maybe Grassington, It takes in quite a lot of towns and huge amounts of reports, and in doing that, I've started to collect, a database essentially, and I've started to map it as well slowly to put it onto Google Maps, which eventually I'll put online and people can just access it as they like. So the earliest reports I've got now from this area, I think the earliest one is 1901, and it's from Haworth. It's a newspaper report, this one. And I got this one online. A colleague sort of shared it with me a few. But yeah, there were two police officers saw this object. They described it as big as a ship in the sky. And I can't remember what it is now. I'd have to look at the report for you. But they described it. There was a game, and it was like a puck, a disc-shaped puck and a stick, right, that was played at the time. And they said it looked like the puck. So we're talking something as big as a ship, disc-shaped, 1901, hovering silently in the sky at Haworth, and seen by police officers of all things. So a very credible report. And, yes, airships were beginning to be developed at that time, but, anyone who looks into this, the mystery airship wave is well recognised. It was going on all around the world, really. It was predating the development of airships. They call them mystery airships, but I think, as we were saying earlier, people are just sort of describing them in the language of the time,
Yeah.
So that's my impression of it. And then I got another report from Burnley, which is 1911, I think. Again, I would have to check, but I think that's right. And there was a group of people witnessing a bright light, orangey coloured light, over towards Pendle Hill. So we're quite close to Pendle Hill here, which is famous for the Pendle witch trials and all that. And there's plenty of UFO sites there, sightings. And if you read the report, again it says that they thought the object was searching for something. It was flying around, it was changing direction, it was surveying the area almost. 1911, and it's like, was it a balloon carrying a spotlight or something like that? Well, it seems unlikely. You know what I mean? And so, yeah, I'm still gathering these reports. And if you've probably done it yourself, the British Newspaper Archive is a really good resource online. You can get your local papers, you can search phrases in them, so like mystery airship or strange lights or whatever. And I've turned up quite a few. I mean, going into the 50s, there were flying saucer reports over Nelson Burnley way. Christmas one of them is the Christmas Day saucer, where these three boys had seen this disc-shaped object hovering, nearby, and then there's a follow-up the week after where some other witnesses had seen it as well. It's incredible. There's just so many. Then in this one, the Pennine UFO Mystery, which is a great book, Jenny Randall's. I recommended this. Barnell's in here because I think it was the 70s, I think it might have been 79. Apparently a coach load of people driving through town, so a large triangular object just hovering over the side of town. Now again, it's not mine. I haven't spoken to the witnesses, so I don't have any more detail than that, But yeah, another report I came across, which is bringing us a bit more up to date now, it was searching online again, and I haven't found the witness, but I would love to. So if the witness is out there happens to see this, please get in touch. And this one's from 2004. You might have seen it yourself if you've been searching online. It was in the newspapers. And what it was, the witness actually had submitted it. He'd got in touch with, I think it was air traffic control at Manchester. He was so impressed with what he'd seen, and it's ended up in the MOD files. So the newspapers have been going through the MOD files and they've reported it, and I managed to find the MOD report, so again I can send that to you if you want. But this guy was in Nelson, it's just 5 miles away, into Lancashire. And he's driving up this particular road. I think he said it was 11:15 in the day, lovely clear day, and he spots this object in the sky which he describes as white, no wings, no tail. Now, this is 2004. I think it was in May. So anyone who's familiar with the Nimitz encounters and the Tic Tac incident, okay, that was November 2004, and they all described the object, Fravor and Dietrich and Underwood, as a white, no wings, no tail, no features object. They called it a Tic Tac. Well, this one, he described it as a chewy mint. You know, so I just think that's brilliant. But it's the same year, it's very similar, and even the choice of description is very similar. Funnily enough, you know, a Tic Tac in the States, and I think, you know, the soft mints.
Yeah.
So they were actually like a disc shape, weren't they?
Yeah.
I guess that's what he meant. But, you know, it's worth arguing that you could look at a Tic Tac from one position and a chewy mint from another, and they look identical. It would only, if you got a full rotation, would you see that one is tubular and one is disc shaped. So I'd argue it could have been very much the same year. And in the report, he describes this object as he saw it in the sky. It performed a Z maneuver in the sky. You know, so I mean, that is beyond the realms of conventional aircraft. A drone, a quadcopter, light, and, you know, with its multi-rotors could pull something like that off. They weren't around in 2004, so it couldn't have been one of those. And he was obviously so compelled that he reported it to air traffic control, you know. So I think that's a really interesting one. I just love the fact that we've got a chewy mint versus the Tic Tac, you know. and I would love to speak to the witness if he happens to hear this. You know, I know he's based in Nelson. He said he took a photograph at the time. We're talking 2004 era phones. Chances of it still being around is slim, but I'd love to see it if it was, you know. So yeah, he's just giving you a taste of some of the reports that we've got from this area. Going through this process of digging out these reports and collating them, putting them together, I've also been putting appeals out online as well. And the other thing I'm doing is I'm keeping my eye on the local newspapers. So I just search, you know, regular way, all the local papers to see if any reports come up. And if they do, I will try and get in touch with the witness. And I've done that a few times this year already. It works quite well. So going back to 2021, it was the 22nd of February, there was an absolutely brilliant report from Col, which is just the other side of Nelson, from a gentleman called Ian Gibbons. And again, I found this one in the newspaper, but it was so impressive, I thought, I've got to track this guy down. It took me a bit of doing, but eventually a friend of a friend put us in touch. And he allowed us to go over and interview him and film him as well. So if anybody's interested in more detail, I have an article about this. But yeah, to run through it, so Ian's sat in his house in Colne, and where he lives is, again, it's on the edge of town, and he's overlooking the hills. And he's got quite a nice view. And he likes a bit of, you know, amateur astronomy. He's not big, but he likes to look at the stars and things. So he sat there, he's watching the sky, and the really interesting part of it is he noticed what he described as a distortion in the sky, first of all. That was the first thing. And I tried to pin him down a bit, like, was it like a whirlpool, or? And he didn't really say. It just seemed to be distorted. I don't know how better to explain it, really. But quite a big area. And this was next to what he thought was Venus. We later found out it was actually Sirius, just by using the astronomy apps to line everything up. So, and then significantly, as this distortion is emerging or appearing in the sky, and what he described as an glowing oval of orange came out of it. So, and I mean, he called it a portal. So let's be serious. You know, his thought was that this is some kind of wormhole, portal, or whatever, and this object has come through it. So we're talking the space-time distortion or something like that potentially. And he described an oval object as it emerged from this portal. And what was interesting to me, he said, as he watched, he said it straightened itself up. And what he meant was it appeared to rotate towards him. Imagine if you've got a circular or a disc-shaped object that's not oriented directly towards you. It's going to look like an oval. So his impression was it rotated so that it was orientated towards him and it became a perfect circle. At this point, he's calling his wife to come and have a look. She's just on the opposite chair anyway. And he goes to get a pair of binoculars. So as he's getting his binoculars, she's having a look. And I spoke to her as well. And she described, which Ian didn't see, so whether she's got better eyes or whether this happened whilst he was away from the window, is a set of red lights equally spaced all around the bottom of, we assume the bottom now, of this object. And then Ian came back and he was looking at it through his binoculars. So if anybody goes to the article, he's done sketches for us, which are really good. And then the next thing was, this object, as he described it, shot, it's hovering stationary, this thing, and then the next thing, it shoots up quite high into the sky at about a 45-degree angle, thereabouts, and hovers again. And he said, normal aircraft don't behave like this, so just incredible. And then he said, from his point of view, it looked more reddish now, it was higher up, and not as bright, but he could still see it clearly. And then his impression was it kind of rotated again, and now it looked like a flying saucer. He literally used the phrase, a disc or a disc with a dome on top. Classic flying saucer. And then it set off twice as fast as a plane. He's over there in Col, towards Skipton.
Yeah.
That way. And then that's the last he saw of it. But that moor between Skipton and Col, and he's Carlton Moor, which we were just talking about, as a hot spot, so that in itself is interesting. And he was fairly blown away by all this. He was really impressed. And another little interesting aside is that I didn't know it at the time because this report hadn't come out. But that night I saw something of interest in the sky, which I can't rule out that was a drone, but I can't say it was. And I'll just tell you that one quickly if you like, because it was literally Ian saw it at 6:30.
Yeah. This
was 12:30, so we're talking 6 hours later, right? But I just come out and I spotted. It was a flashing light, but it was more like a pulse. It was really slow. It flared up, dimmed down like that, and I thought that's a bit interesting. I'm going to pay attention to that. I brought a bag of rubbish out to me, so I'm looking up there, and there's a tree, and it's going from my left to right behind this tree. When I put my rubbish bag, come back, and now it's going from right to left. So it's made a direction change. So I'm like, right, it's not a plane. It's not a helicopter because it's 12:30 at night and there's no sound. It's silent, and you can hear cars coming into town. It's quite rural here. And so I kept watching it, and this thing continued heading left, and it's just doing this pulsing thing. I did film it, and the video weren't coming out well on my phone, so I took some motion photos, which are about 10 or 11 of them, which are little tiny short videos, so they're quite good. And it continued past the houses over here, so past the houses over here, and then I lost it. It actually went down below the houses, which is really low, Nothing big like a helicopter or anything is going to be going down there. It could have only been a drone if it was anything conventional. Next thing, it's coming back. It's going the other way. And I watched it, and the ironic thing is, it went off towards Col. You know what I mean? Exactly where Ian had his sighting earlier that day. And so part of me sort of thinks that they might be related. Again, I can't rule out a drone, but we would have to be talking about someone with a headset on, piloting it, because it's such a distance away. And to be flying around, I don't know. I just don't know. But it was interesting. And I mean, Ian Gibbons' sighting, the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies is an organisation based in America. Robert Powell's one of the lead guys there. And they were very interested in Ian's sighting. They were in touch with him, and I was in touch with them. And the video I filmed, the interview with him, was in part for them, so I sent it to them so they could use it as part of their material as well, So that was interesting. And a brilliant guy, Ian, he's kept in touch. he's told me of a few sightings since as well, which have been less dramatic, shall we say, a bit more ambiguous. But yeah, brilliant report, that one. Yeah.
It's interesting you saying, with the drone, thinking that you might have seen a drone. It's not many drones work in the dark.
Good point.
Unless it's a very expensive
You don't want to see
one.
nothing, are you? That's a good point. I didn't really think about. Yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah, and I mean, to me, this object was a lot like the gimbal. So anyone's seen the gimbal footage that was released by the military, where they've got something that appears to be rotating. And if you listen to the witnesses who were involved, via Ryan Graves, the pilot, this disc-shaped object was being followed by a V-shaped formation of smaller objects. It just makes me wonder that Ian sees this big disc and then I'm seeing this smaller, flashy thing running around. Yeah. But anyway, talking about drones, this will tie into the Calf case actually, but 2020, so the year previous to this, there's a brilliant video, we filmed it over Barnell's week. It's on YouTube and it's shared around quite a lot as a dramatic and amazing video, this one. It was filmed on VE Day during lockdown. And I've luckily enough, I live here, so it's been easy for me. So I've got both. I've got the video and I've got a second witness that saw the same thing. So this family, everyone were out, VE Day, it's about 9 o'clock. It was garden parties, it was a chance to get outside and socialise a little bit after all the lockdown. So this family, they sat out and they noticed a bright, shiny looking thing in the sky. So he started filming on his iPhone. And it's moving around quite erratically, this. There's about 2 minutes of footage and then it flies off. And if you ever watch, it's brilliant. You've got the kids commenting on it, and it's really good to listen to the audio.
Is it moving? Look at Dad. Is it moving?
Yeah, it's moving. Slowly, but then it'll zigzag at light of all.
Don't say that.
Seriously? Look how fast it accelerates.
Oh my God, it's not even funny, this is scary. There's not even any more of them.
Oh my God, it's just...
Is there? Oh my God. Oh my God.
Shut up.
Shut up. Oh my God. It's aliens. I believe in aliens.
Now, I also found a second witness, someone I went to school with. We'll just call him Graham. He was in a different location at the exact same time, filming the same thing. So I've got 2 videos of this from 2 separate locations. And because I know the town, I've geolocated them both by, visiting the area, taking a picture, matching that to what's on the footage, So it's a double-edged sword, this, because the great thing about this is I've got 2 witnesses independent of each other. They didn't know about each other at the time. That filmed this object. The videos cross. You know, one is a little bit longer. One filmed a bit longer than the other, but they cross over. And I've shown it with image. I've shared it with image analysts and two of them, and they're both of the opinion that they can't rule out a quadcopter, which is really frustrating. But it's how I felt as well. And the reason is because it was 9 o'clock in May, and I've done some tests using drones, and at that time the sun is really low, like really low on the horizon, and so anything in the sky will get a bright reflection on it. So I think we can safely say what we're looking at is a reflection. It's not a self-illuminated object, you know. But is it a drone? I don't know. You know, I don't know. There are some factors that suggest it could be. Just it doesn't do anything that a drone couldn't do. You know, a quadcopter, the way it flies. But it's the only thing it could be because nothing else would fly like that. And for somebody to be filming, it's a really erratic flight path. You know, you could argue, oh, well, they're filming the garden parties and stuff, you know, for an event or whatever. But it was really erratic flight path, and then it set off. So it was up over the main town centre where this was filmed, and then it set off down that way towards sort of Clitheroe and Gisborne and what have you, which is much lower end of town. And again, I would have to argue that any pilot operating a drone would have to have the goggles on, because they wouldn't have been able to see it. You know, they would have lost sight of it.
Yeah.
On the second video, it kind of goes right above the witness and flies off, and you can't hear it. And I've spoken to quite a few drone pilots, and they all say, well, you know, yeah, you can get them high, and you know, but I can always hear it. You know, they said they can always hear just that, bzzz, you know. So I don't know. Again, I'm on the fence with that one. I've got an article I've nearly finished. It's 90% done. Just needs a bit of polishing and all that lot. And the reason why I haven't put it out is because it's a grey basket case. You know, I don't have a firm conclusion, unfortunately, about it. But I still think it's interesting.
Yeah, it's good that you've been sceptical about it and not saying, oh, this is what it is. You know, that's what I like about you and your work, how you do that.
Yeah.
You never pinpoint that this is what it is. You give people the truth behind it and what you think, and let them do the thinking.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I just think you have to be honest, don't you? So if we don't know, we don't know. There's no point in pretending we do. You know what I mean? I could go either way with this one because of all the reports I've got from this town. And I mean, the Ford family case, you know, for example, all that stuff, that's just one family. I've got about another 20, 30 reports just from the town, you know. So I know things are going on here. But yeah, it's an interesting one. I will get it finished at some point and put it out there.
I look forward to reading that.
Yeah. So, I mean, we can go on from there. It probably marries quite nicely because this was May 2020. So, 7th of July 2020, over in Todmorden, a gentleman called Albert T.S. and his girlfriend went for a walk around Gaddings Dam, if anyone knows the area. Gaddings Dam at Todmorden. And they spotted what they thought was a dog, actually, at first, a dead dog, a golden Labrador because of the colour of it and the size. And as he got closer, he realised that it wasn't, it was a calf. But they were confused because it was clearly a dead calf, but it wondered why it didn't have a tail. Anyway, luckily for us, Albert was familiar with the subject matter of animal mutilations, and so when he saw it, he knew he was looking at a classic example of a cattle mutilation, essentially, and we'll go through why in a minute. And so he took 8 pictures, you know. I mean, it's a gruesome thing, you know what I mean? So respect to the guy, you know. He got up close and he took 8 photographs of this dead calf in a field. But to me, and then he shared them online. And as soon as I saw them, I knew exactly what I was looking at, as anyone would who's familiar with it, because the injuries are so distinctive. You know, the classic, to use that term, just they've been going on for years. So I reached out and I got put in touch with Albert TS and David Caton, who is one of the most respected mutilation researchers in the UK, really, and made arrangements to go up to the site. So, I mean, before I describe that, I'll describe what's in the photos. So the first one, the classic injury, is what we call a jaw strip. And you can see in the photograph quite clearly, it's a very clean cut. It goes right round here, partially onto the neck, and back round onto the bottom jaw. And it's just consistent with what has always been part of it. I mean, these are why they have the phrases. So a jaw strip, the ear's gone, and the ear's cut right down to the scalp and removed, and what's really, really interesting and unusual there is no blood. There's not a speck of blood around the ear. And I mean, it's been completely removed, Looking closely at the pictures, you can see that the tongue is gone. And the reason for that is if you look very closely, you can see the teeth on the far side, which would have been obscured by the tongue, so that's gone. There's a minimal amount of blood, a tiny amount around the bottom of the head. To the back end, the tail's gone, and there's what they call a rectal core, and again, you can see clean bone in there. And that's the thing about the jaw strips. They usually, always, they removed all flesh, all sinew, everything, right down to the bone. And I know, speaking with David Caton, he's talked to butchers and things like that, and they said, well, look, for us to achieve something like that, we use high pressure steam to separate the sinew from the actual bone, So for that to be done in the field, middle of nowhere, is just ridiculous. But this is what happens consistently, And then another thing I noticed, which I think is really important, you look at the back end in the photographs, and if people want to look at the article or whatever, they can see them themselves. There's no blood, not a speck of blood, but even more than that, the tufts of grass are quite clearly there, right up to the back end of the animal. So, if you wanted to argue that it had been predated on, which is a valid argument, essentially, you would expect to see the grass flattened down. You would expect to see, not being a bit graphic, but, chew marks and tears and rips and things like that. And certainly blood. I mean, blood everywhere. There should be blood everywhere. And there's none, So the implication has always been, or the suggestion, that these animals are, by whatever's doing it, it's done elsewhere, and then they're brought back and they're left there. So that's the scene that was confronted by Albert. 2 weeks, it was about 2 weeks later, me and Victoria, we went up there and we met with him. The animal was still there, so we did everything we could essentially with what we had. So we had a powerful magnet. So we thought, well, we'll just sweep it around, see if we can get any, meteorites or just anything, bits of metal, particles of metal. We were looking for the ear tag because the ear was gone. And as David Caton has confirmed to me, it's really common with these types of mutilations that the ear's cut off, it's gone, it's missing, but the tag is left with the animal. Which is strange, but it's true. It was the same in Tomodon. The ear's gone, the tail's gone. Nowhere to be found, nowhere around, We suspect blood is removed because, if you cut the tongue off something, its head was actually lower than its back end as it was lying in the pasture. You're going to expect seepage there. And the other thing is, I strongly suspect, just from looking at the pictures, that this happened. I think Albert found it around 1 o'clock on a Sunday, and I think it must have happened early hours, closer to the morning, the previous night, or early hours of that morning, essentially, because there was still wet blood there. It wasn't coagulated, so very fresh. We went. We were looking for the tag. We didn't find it. We took some soil samples from under the animal and from 30 feet away. I still have them, and to be honest, I haven't done anything with them because I don't really have the contacts, So if anybody out there has the ability to analyse soil and things like that, please get in touch. I've done a bit of research. I might do a bit of experimentation myself, just, litmus paper and things like that, just to see what we can determine. As you know, we did go later and we recovered the jawbone, the left side, which I thought was really important because we've got the photographs of the injury, which cuts right across that jawbone. And from what we know about how butchers work and things, you maybe should expect to see knife marks if someone's had to cut this sinew away, you know. And there isn't any of that. As you know, there's a bit of feels like a polished area on it. It feels very smooth. You can have some pictures of that if you want.
Yeah.
What we did, we went back a couple of times, and we also recovered. We've actually got most of the skull now, but we recovered a portion of the skull, the other jaw as well. And Victoria, she noticed on one of the portions of the skull, it's just above the eye. There's two scratches parallel, and they just flare out slightly. You know, they become wider at the bottom slightly. They're maybe 15, 20 mil long each, about 5 going to 10 mil apart at the bottom. They're very straight. And what's interesting is they come in it from an angle like that. If you look really closely, I've looked at them, with digital microscope. And what I found at the time is that at the top and bottom of each of these two scratches, there was a hole. Yeah. Now, with hindsight, it could be that it's just the makeup of the skull. It's a very porous kind of bone. So maybe the scratch itself was just a bit deeper at the beginning and end, and it had punctured into one of these, you know. Either that or it was an actual hole. I can't say whether these were... We know that animals predated on this afterwards, because when I got there, it had been dragged away, it was half eaten, you know. And I think it's badgers actually, because we know there's badgers up at Gannings Dam. So I can't say for sure it wasn't caused by natural predation, but it caught Vicky's eye because it looks very straight. I tried to replicate it with a scalpel, and it just doesn't look anything like it. It looks rough, and you know.
Yeah.
So that I thought that was interesting. You know, what can you do? I mean, I got in touch with Shepherd's Rest, which is the pub. It's right there on site. You know where it is really. It's just the pub's there. There's a lane. There's a bit of a field, and that's where the calf was. Had they seen anything unusual? Just helicopters or anything, you know? And they did get back to me and said no, they haven't seen anything. So we went up later and we found a herd up at the top of Gannings Dam, which we decided it's the herd that this particular calf was from. It was a Jersey calf, by the way, young Jersey calf, 3 months, really young. And the rest of the herd was up there. There were other calves of the similar age, but obviously it was a month later, so these were now like 4 month old. So at that point we identified who the farmer was, because I was told who had this herd, so I knew who the farmer was. And we did notice that they weren't actually tagged, the calves, you know. So for this reason I've kept the farmer's name out of all this, to protect him a little bit, just out of respect, you know. Yeah. But talking with David Caton actually had been to that farm, the very farm, same one, 2001, to investigate a sheep mutilation, the same jaw strip, classic thing. And he was actually dealing with a lady who was sharing the farm. She was sort of renting off him, or they both, I don't know the layout. So he wasn't dealing directly with this particular farmer, but he had met him and spoke to him. And the guy, he was very hostile and sceptical about the subject, wasn't interested. As David said, he was a little bit rough. You know, his farm was a bit rough, a bit messy. And in doing research, I discovered that he'd been fined by DEFRA, I think it was about 2011, and he'd been banned from keeping livestock for 5 years, something like that. It was just, you know, it's a public record, so you can find the file, which I did. And now, it's hard to say, you know, was it just his bad practices that had caused DEFRA to get on his case and fine him, or if he had been suffering mutilations, you know, maybe that drew their attention, you know. I think within there, part of it was allowing animals to just rot on the fields, kind of thing, which is exactly what happened with the calf, Tomodon. It was left to just rot. We kept going back to retrieve these pieces after they'd been cleaned by insect life, you know. So that was interesting. But yeah, David determined, because he spoke to the guy, and the guy said he'd let him know if anything else happened. But what he heard from the lady was he had 5. So there'd been 5 mutilations on that farm between 2001 and 2020 when we went up there. Now, just to be clear, the farmer must be renting the land around Gaddings Dam because his farm it's not exactly there. It's not far away, but he's not on the farm, if you will. And this particular site where this calf was found, there's no roads, you know. It's a footpath. There's no way a vehicle could have got there. If you want to imagine that people have done this or something like that, there's no way they could have gone in there with a vehicle and dumped the thing off. 11 months later, I actually saw this online on social media. It was on the Tomberton UFO group page, and a lady had posted, "Did anyone see the strange flashing light thing around Gaddings Dam?" She said. So I got in touch with her straight away. Started looking into her report. So it was the calf was, I think it was the 7th of July. I think this was the 5th of June. But the calf was 2020. This was 2021. So 11 months after. And she lives on the opposite side of the valley. She's looking down on, if anyone that knows the area, it's Tomberton Valley. You've got Gaddings Dam, which is where the Shepherd's Rest pub is. Gaddings Dam is an old disused reservoir. It's actually, they call it the highest beach in the UK because there's a bit of a beach around it. People go up there and swim. I'm sure have you been there?
Yeah, I'm on the way, sure.
Yeah, so this lady, and then further to her left, so you know, is Studley Pike. It's called. It's quite a significant monument. And so she reported she'd seen this object, and I mean the description is wild, to be honest with you. She said it looked like a plasma ball. So anyone who's seen a plasma ball, the glass plasma ball, she said 5 arms, so like those electric arms that come off the centre of the plasma ball. 5 of them, bright orange, really bright, she said, no central colour and no outline either. So it's just an object that's got like 5 arms. And when I really questioned about this, which I did, she said they weren't crackling or anything, they were just fixed. They were just fixed in this position. Right, but she watched it coming from Gaddings Dam, which is the area of this mutilation site, travelling from her right to left, following the contours of the hill, which again is, I've heard this before in other reports. Something, you know, you're talking about altitude changes and things like that. Following the contour of the hill until it got to about Studley Pike, she said, and then it made a zigzag ascent up into a cloud. She said there was a bright flash of orange light, the same colour as these arms, if you will, and then nothing. That was that. So, they opened the window. There was no sound associated with it. I asked her about the size, and she said, well, she thought it was about the size of the tractors. That when she sees the tractors driving about during the day, about that big. So 10, 15, 20 feet. It's not a little thing, you know. And I did ask her, I said, do you think it could have been a spiral flight path, you know, maybe? And she said, no, it was very definitely going from side to side, zigzagging like that, which is highly unusual flight characteristics, really kind of consistent with, you know, UFOs, UAP.